Galileo famously proclaimed that the sun remains fixed in the center of the circle of heavenly bodies without changing its place, and the Earth, turning upon itself, moves around the sun. We've learned a lot since those words were spoken, most notably how our solar system came to be.
So we live in a pretty cool part of the galaxy,
Yeah.
Our solar system right here, right over our nice little corner.
Our 8 planets. We're going to leave it at that for now.
For right now. But let's talk about how our solar system came into existence.
Yes, exactly.
It's kind of cool.
Right? Because as old as it is, almost 5 billion, about 4.5, a little more than,
Yep.
what ignited our solar system into existence had to be the death of something else,
Yeah.
a massive star.
That's right. There was another star in this portion, or not too far from us, of this part of the galaxy that exploded. Now, it exploded, like you said, as a supernova, but what happens is they essentially get way too big and they can no longer keep in balance how big they are with how much energy they're putting out. So, in order to rebalance themselves, they get rid of some of their excess weight and they blow it off as a big explosion. Now, the explosion causes shock waves, and it's those shock waves that really make the difference for these new regions to turn into stars. The shock waves begin to make these areas collect dust and dirt, hydrogen that's left over in that region, and that starts the process.
Of a new system,
A brand new
essentially.
system.
In most of our solar system, the mass is our sun, which makes sense considering how big it is and that we all have to orbit it.
Right.
So about 99% of all the mass in our solar system is our sun, and the leftover trash became us.
Well, because of the way the sun starts, there's all this rotation of all this material around the sun. And as everything is rotating around, things are slamming together and sort of building up into becoming planets.
Things were crashing into each other all the time and almost Frankenstein's monstering. They were just parts put together over time.
The heat of it tends to differentiate how the internal structure of these planets are. So all of these rocky planets that are closer to the sun, they're made of the heavier materials that can't get blown out away from the solar wind.
Right.
They all sort of collect around the inner portion of the solar system, and then the lighter elements get pushed further out. They eventually become the planets that we see out there now of Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune.
The asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter wanted to be a planet. Jupiter said,
Wanted so bad.
you ain't.
You're not going to be a planet
You're not gonna be
today.
a planet. Saturn's rings have a similar story too, don't they? Those rings wanted to be a moon.
Yeah.
I mean, it has a lot already.
That's
Didn't
true.
need it.
We have a big planet like Saturn. And Saturn, because of its size, also has a lot of moons that orbit it. But if those moons get too close to the planet, a tug of war sets up between the outer moons and the planet itself. And this tug of war tends to pull these inner moons apart. And we now see those inner moons distributed around Saturn like a ring.
Beyond Neptune
Right.
would be Pluto,
And
maybe a planet, but
maybe a
it's
few other planets out there.
That's right.
Sure.
Which is part of the Kuiper Belt,
Right, that's right.
which is mostly filled with asteroids,
Right,
rocky stuff.
sure.
And then beyond that, something known as the Oort cloud.
Right, that's the very outer shell of our solar system's materials, and mostly made up of comets and things of that sort.
Gotcha.
Right,
Absolutely.
so we have all of those things in our solar system. We have the asteroids, we have the comets, we have the planets, we have the planetoids, the moons, the planetesimals, and a star.
And the star.
And that makes up a solar system.
solar system. And that goes to show you how far out there our sun's influence is.
It reaches
That
way, way, way out.
Oort cloud is massive.
It is, and way, way out. But here's a cool question. What about other stars? They also have planets, we're beginning to find out. And some of the work that was done by one of the satellites, the Kepler satellite, has shown us that there definitely are planets orbiting other stars. So much so that astronomers now believe that it's way more likely for a star to have planets than not have planets.
Not. So
Right.
far, we've discovered over 4,600 exoplanets. And that's been
Wow.
since only the early 90s.
Wow.
And technology just keeps getting better and better, so we keep finding more and more.
And we've only looked at a small percentage
Yeah.
of stars in the galaxy.
Exactly.
So this is now taking us in a totally different direction. I mean, in terms of understanding what we see of the night sky, because now it's almost as if whenever we look out into the sky and we see a star, we should assume that it has at least one
At
planet.
least one, absolutely.
Could be more.
Could be more, exactly. So if we say roughly that we have maybe 500 billion stars in our Milky Way, then that's at least 500 billion other planets, and most probably have like two, maybe 2.5 even, an average
That's
number.
a trillion
That's
planets
a trillion
then.
planets within our own Milky Way galaxy. I have found out that so far, most of the exoplanets discovered tend to be mini Neptunes. So a lot of gaseous planets, but smaller than Neptune, but we've certainly discovered quite a few Earth-like as well. Even our closest star neighbor, Proxima Centauri. Recently, they discovered an Earth-like planet orbiting around it.
You mean Earth-like, Earth-like?
That's right.
Swimmable oceans and things of that sort?
At least rocky. There is that one TRAPPIST system that has 7 Earth-like planets.
Wow, that's a lot.
2 of them in the Goldilocks zone, also known as habitable zone.
Okay.
Meaning it's the right distance from the star for water to be liquid.
Aha,
That's the
great.
key, guys. Water is life.
Water has to be liquid,
That's
right.
right.
You know, we're in a good position, not just because we have the liquid water, but as it turns out, this planet has evolved in such a way that makes it possible for life to have emerged here.
Yes.
You know, what we have above us is a very, very thin blanket of atmosphere that allows us to breathe and protects us from the extreme temperatures of space and all. But at the same time, part of the layering of that atmosphere also protects us from the extreme ultraviolet radiation. The environment of space beyond the Earth's atmosphere is really quite nasty.
Again, utmost importance of taking care of our fragile atmosphere. I heard an analogy once: if you dip a basketball in water and you take it out, just that layer of water that sits on there as it's falling off is as thin as our atmosphere is to our planet.
Absolutely.
It's that fragile.
Right, it is that fragile. Because if we look at any of the other planets that don't have that kind of protection, well, their surfaces can be sterilized by the ultraviolet radiation. It's that
Absolutely.
intense.
It's that intense. Once
so-
again, what gives us life can kill us. So just like there is a birth of our solar system, there's going to eventually be a death.
There's an end coming, yes.
That's right.
Yes, it's eventual that this solar system is going to peter out. And that's going to happen when our sun begins to change from its current state and begin to age in a way that starts to affect the planets.
I can imagine.
Well, imagine this. You think we're in a good position in our solar system right now? Imagine being so close to the sun that we're barely touching the outer edge of the sun's atmosphere.
I will just say I hope it's a quick death.
You know, I'll tell you, there isn't an SPF high enough that can protect
100
any of
won't
us
save
if that
me
happens.
anymore.
But you know, it's not that the planets themselves are going to suddenly fall into the sun or orbit closer to the sun.
Right.
It's that our star, as it ages, will begin to expand. And as it expands, it will cool and it will dim. But what's going to happen is it's going to start to get so big that it engulfs all of the planets of the inner solar system. Mercury, Venus, Earth, and Mars will eventually be inside the sphere of the sun.
Right.
Now, if you're living out at Jupiter or Saturn, maybe that's a better thing for you because you'll melt out and maybe have a better place to live. But
It's true.
I think for us here on Earth, it means that we either need to get our act together about being able to explore and travel through, near space,
Yes.
or I think we're going to have to really worry about the end of this planet and the end of civilization and
As
humanity
we know it, in about 5 billion years, right? That's
Wait,
the
you
amount
said
of
5
time.
million?
5 billion
Oh, whew.
with the B.
Thank
So Elon
goodness.
has time.
I
He
feel
has to
better.
get us to Mars and beyond, but he's got some time.